Welcome to Manatee Tiger Bay's Luncheon. Our topic today is going to be media and its influence. First, I would like to go ahead and do the Pledge of Allegiance. So if I could all have you stand with me, please. Right over here. Perfect. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which will stand one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Perfect. Thank you. Alrighty. And next I'd like to recognize any active duty members in our audience. If there is, thank you very much for your service. And then next I would like to recognize any dignitaries that we have in the audience. So far I have seen Councilwoman Lisa Moore, welcome, Mayor Judy Tisworth of Holmes Beach, and Chief of Police William Tokager. And then I also have a couple of candidates that are going to be running for offices here. Ty Sadiq and Jennifer Hamey. Yep, welcome. Thank you all. Great. Christy, if you want to come up, we have a couple of announcements.
Oh, that was a terrible noise. Hi, I'm Christy. Xtavia is joining us again when she gets back after the first of the year, but she asked me to make a few announcements. First of all, we need everyone to continue filling out your applications for membership. We are due up in January, and we need as many people to rejoin as we can. We are offering scholarships this year. Last year, we were able to give out $7,000 for the young leaders coming up, going into college, and that is a wonderful way to spend our Tiger Bay money. We already have $5,000 in sponsorship for next year. Gilbane Construction has offered that scholarship, so we are grateful to them. Continue to please continue to encourage young people to apply for those scholarships. This is our last meeting before the holiday break, so we will have our Pat Glass Memorial Scholarship fundraiser in February. And we will also be nominating members of Tiger Bay for awards. It's another great reason to renew your membership. You could win an award. So please continue renewing. Please let everyone you know share. Obviously, the weather hampered some of our guests today because we had quite a few on the list that have not made it in yet. But we look forward to them joining us as we continue this luncheon and this fabulous conversation. Is that all? Thank you. So fill out your applications. Thank you.
And if you don't know where to get an application, right there on your desk or on your table is a nice little QR code. It'll take you directly to it. So that way you can pay your fees all in one stop. All right. Wonderful. Okay, so just as a reminder, if everyone could go ahead and silence your cell phones so that we can get through this without any interruptions. Again, our topic today is going to be media and the influence. So I have our speakers here, Miss Renee James Gilmore of Empowering Voices and ABC 7 WWSB Suncoast. Thank you. And Ms. Summer Smith, anchor at WWSB ABC 7 News. Mark Gordon, managing editor of the Business Observer. And then Dennis Malley, editor of the Bradenton Times. So welcome. Thank you all today. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and give you all about 7 minutes to go give your speech. And then after that, we've got a couple of questions. And we're going to start with Ms. Renee. You first. If you'd like to come up here to the podium, please.
Well, thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it. So let me just start by saying that I actually do a community affairs program, although periodically I do sit in and do some news, and that usually is in response to something that's going on out there in the universe, and so I can give a local perspective. I'm happy to say that I have been with ABC 7. This is now my second time around. I actually started with them when my father was doing news for ABC 7 some many, many years ago. So this is my second time around. I had the great pleasure the first time of coming out of college, going to work there, and working my way up to being the night news director at that point before I decided to go off to business school. So I'm fortunate, I think, in the sense that my work outside of journalism does a good deal to inform me in terms of what I'm seeing and responding to and reporting on in the news. So I have a pretty good grip on what happens, how government works, how nonprofits work, that kind of thing. So I feel like I have the best job in the media in the area because, again, working from a community affairs standpoint, I get not just to report on news, but to actually delve into the whys and the behind the scenes and how people are being impacted on the ground level. So in terms of, as Stavia informed me that we needed to talk a little bit about how we select news stories and how we make sure that things are said on or covered in a fair and balanced way. My show is a 30-minute show that comes on Saturday mornings, but again, the station gives me opportunity to come in and do special reports on certain topics. And so we get a chance to really delve into more than just what you often might see as like a 3-minute story on television. So it's good for the community in that sense because, again, you don't just hear the what's happening, but you hear to a great degree why it's happening and how it's impacting people. So I love the benefit of, again, having 30 minutes to talk as opposed to my colleague Summer, who may only have literally 2 minutes to report on the story. My space, if you will, is really that of giving regular people, those of us who just live and enjoy living here on the Suncoast, giving them a voice. Most of the people that I talk to would not have an opportunity to be on television and certainly not to have a 15-minute or 30-minute spot because they're not necessarily always people who are in power. In fact, what we talk about on my show is essentially really speaking truth to power. And that's not me speaking it, but having a platform for others to speak. Thank you. We talk oftentimes about things that are happening not just at the national level, but that national level that gives resonates here in the local area. So things like what's happening with domestic violence, what's happening in the business world, in fact, with loans and how how small businesses are doing, the behind the scenes of that, and what policies impact an ability of a population, if you will. And the data usually always speaks to this. Anytime I'm having people on my show while they're talking about, while they're talking about an issue, we have done the work behind the scenes to see what the data shows. So things like when it's reported that Black businesses in particular get, all things being equal, they're getting fewer loans and smaller amounts of loans. Not my just saying, hey, come on and say this, or giving you a platform for saying it, but we'll have the data to back it up. It's my hope that when we talk about what's happening in our communities, that people understand the data behind it. So while I don't spend a lot of time saying, here's the data, we usually pull up and document the sources that we're working from. And I do work on some established sources. I don't usually get my news and information from Facebook. I want to point out that there are other perspectives, and oftentimes, and I'm sure my colleagues will talk about this, but we talk about there are often narratives out there in the universe. Because I'm a reporter, because I'm a journalist who comes from a perspective of being in many minority populations. I'm a female, I'm African American, and I am in that small population that is actually from Sarasota, fourth generation. So I can look back a lot of decades and talk about where we are today and see and understand how we have come to be the Suncoast area that we are now. So that, too, I think is a really special population in terms of understanding growth and development here on the Suncoast. Tiger Bay is one of the organizations that not only does ABC7 belong to as a community organization, but I always like to show up at these Tiger Bay Manatee, because you all talk real talk here. And I've been in the room when it hasn't been pretty, but what I do know is this is the kind of space that we enjoy featuring on Empowering Voices because it's real talk by real people who want to make a difference. And we know we don't always agree within community, but my show allows us to at least have a conversation about things that you would not necessarily hear the other side of the story or another side of a story, a different perspective than what's typically heard. So I will close and turn it over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All righty, next we have Summer Smith.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you. My name is Summer Smith, and I am the evening news anchor for ABC 7, and I also am an adjunct professor at USF in Tampa, so I teach future aspiring journalists how to write for news media and radio. So I'm getting to work in the professional industry and then help our future generation, and I really have enjoyed that part of my newest career. I've only been doing that about 3 years. Something about me, I was born and raised in Manatee County, and I'm a product of the Manatee County school system, the public schools, and I love this community. So much so when I met my husband, we both went to Florida State, and we moved around a little bit with our careers, that I said, we gotta come back here. So now I'm raising my family here. I have 3 children, elementary, middle, high school, and so I feel like I'm out and about in the community. I understand what's going on in the schools, sports, politics, just friendships. So I always have my ears open to different things going on. And I love that I get to report and hopefully help improve this community with what I do for a living. I have 25 years experience in the news industry. And with ABC 7, I love that we cover local news, Manatee and Sarasota County specifically. And we cover a wide variety of topics from education, politics, business news, environment, weather related. That's obviously a huge story here with hurricanes that like to come our way every year. But we rely on our community members for our success. So it's the stories that people will write into us, or I hear at the ballpark with my children, issues going on. That's how we find our best stories. So it's because of everyone at home with what's going on in their lives. We have the ability to hopefully help them, get situations resolved, report the information. If someone loses their home or has a roof issue, we can go into their homes and help them resolve these issues. But it's important for us when we report on the news to have both sides. We always say we like to have 2 sources. We never want to be one-sided. Does that happen sometimes, or does it seem that way? Yes, it does. Sometimes if we're trying to get both sides, for example, a crime case, we can't always get the suspect or the person who's been arrested to talk to us. And that's unfortunate because I think it'd change a lot of stories if we heard their side of the story. Sometimes they will grant us that interview, but a lot of the times they will not. But our goal is to always be in the middle, representing both sides, so it doesn't seem like we're reporting one way or the other. For example, if we are interviewing a mayor who is running for office and we have a Republican and a Democrat running, we're going to want to interview both for that story because it just wouldn't be fair to give that one candidate that airtime. Some national outlets right now are being accused of being biased. It's a hot topic right now. I feel like when dealing with local coverage, even our Tampa stations, I don't see that as much. Of course, it depends on the viewer, and there are some reporters that might slant a certain way. I can't control that personally, but I know our station really strives and tries to, again, represent both sides and not ever be one-sided one way or the other. We do need to report the truth, not opinions. We were talking about that. Sometimes we get great story ideas, but you just can't run with it. You just can't accuse someone of something without the law enforcement side or getting someone to say, yes, this is factual. Because by doing that, we obviously open up ourselves to a lawsuit if we're reporting something that's not true and accusing someone of something. Again, does that happen sometimes? Yes, unfortunately it does. One thing I've just loved is developing good relationships with our community members. Again, I get some of my best stories from those who I've developed a relationship with. For example, Chief Tokager out there, we have worked together since he was at the Bradenton Police Department, and we have just maintained a great relationship, and he always makes himself available whenever we need an interview or something going on. And that's something, too, I often tell people out in the community, if only you want to, but making yourself available to the media or staying in touch, that just helps tremendously with getting good information out and correct information. So I always say you should definitely try to establish a relationship with your local news outlets and newspapers, radio, et cetera. And that way, too, when you have that, it's that familiar name. When Chief Tokager emails me, I know it's something serious or, important because we have that established relationship. I do want to point out with ABC7, I worked for a Tampa station before, but with ABC7, we were saying we do have a wide variety of age groups, so mistakes do happen sometimes. And what I like to ask people is if you ever see something that's wrong, call us, write us. We will fix it. If you want to offer your side to a story, we would never say, no, we don't want to hear that. Again, that's what makes us improve, and that's what makes us have better coverage and respect and trust in our community. With that said, I wrote really small print. So again, yes, write us and tell us when something's going on. So one of the questions Xtavia asked us to focus on, and how has the media changed for the good? Well, for the good, I think the media has changed because you don't have to wait for the 5 o'clock news anymore for something to come out, or the newspaper in the morning. Social media has just changed everything, and the web. In the internet. So you are able to get out information quickly. As soon as you send me a press release, we can have that on our Facebook page. We can have it on Twitter, which is X now, our website within a matter of 5 to 10 minutes. And I say press release, or when the sheriff's office releases anything, Port Manatee has an oil spill, something like that. We have the ability to get that out very quickly. But on our end, we obviously have to check our sources and make sure everything is factual. Phone interviews, Zoom, in-person interviews. A few years ago, prior to COVID, we would have never dreamed of doing interviews through Zoom. COVID changed that. So now we don't have to drive all the way, to Arcadia maybe 30 minutes before our newscast. We're able to interview someone through Zoom and get them on the news. That was just impossible years ago. So that has changed everything. So how has the media changed for the bad? Well, information gets out too quickly because you just aren't checking the sources sometimes maybe as well, or being able to get both sides like you used to. And am I really getting on 7 minutes already? I didn't think I'd be able to fill it. Okay, so this is a small town and a lot of people, so we want to make sure we're getting it correct. And I worry we may be losing some forms of traditional media with the social media. Our younger generations aren't watching the standard newscasts, and they're not reading the newspaper. They're relying on social media like Facebook and Twitter, where all the information obviously isn't always accurate. So I have some business cards up here. Please reach out to me, develop a relationship with me. I'd love to help you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Summer. All righty. Mark, you ready?
Thank you. Is this on? Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I'm Mark Gordon, the managing editor of the Business Observer. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Business Observer in a minute and kind of what we look for and what we look for in stories. I think it's important to understand the history of the Observer Media Group as well. I'm going to get into that. As far as me, again, my name is Mark. I'm the first person up. Are you from here, Mitch? All right, so Mitch is not from here as well. I grew up in New York, but I've lived here almost 20 years, so it kind of makes me sort of native. My wife and I have a 15-year-old son, so he is a native. He goes to Braden River High School. Go Pirates. So like I said, I grew up in New York, and I was working for newspapers and magazines in New York and Philadelphia. In 2005, my wife was recruited for a job in Manatee County. She works in healthcare. She's a speech pathologist. She was recruited for a job at a nursing home next to Blake Memorial Hospital in Bradenton. So growing up in New York, the only Florida I literally had ever been to was Boca Raton and Deerfield Beach. That was it. And I said, I'm not ready for Florida. We were 30 and we didn't have kids yet, but it was a really good opportunity for her. And we came down here and have been here ever since. So when I came down here, I didn't have any job in journalism, but I met the owner of the Observer Media Group. His name is Matt Walsh. And some of you probably know Matt. I think it's important to understand the history. Yes, all right, I like Matt too. He pays my check, pays my every 2 weeks. Matt and Lisa Walsh, Lisa passed away a couple of months ago, but Matt and Lisa Walsh are the owners of the Observer Media Group, and it was 1995, and Matt and Lisa were living in St. Pete, and this really hip, cool neighborhood, and they had 3 young kids, 10, 7, and 2. And Matt was the editor of Florida Trend magazine. Before that, he had opened Forbes's Florida office, and before that, he was the assistant business editor for the Miami Herald. Matt always wanted to own his own newspaper, and the opportunity came up to buy the Longboat Observer. And the 2 stipulations in the contract from the elderly couple, Ralph and Claire Hunter, that were selling the Longboat Observer was 1, you had to live on Longboat, and 2, you had to be a registered Republican. Those were the 2 stipulations in the contract to buy that paper. And so if you've seen Matt's editorials, you know the second, being a registered Republican, was not a challenge for him. The first was a challenge because Lisa, his wife at the time, was, again, she was in journalism, but mostly stay at home, and she had 3 young kids. And the idea of moving to Longboat, even then, 1995, with, where there were no kids at all, was a challenge. But they did, and it's been super successful. And we now have, in this area, we have 4 newspapers, plus some other publications and websites. But there's the East County Observer, which you've probably seen out here in Manatee County, Sarasota Observer, which focuses mostly downtown Sarasota and sort of the surrounding area, and the flagship paper, the Longboat Observer, which obviously covers Longboat and that area. In 1997, Matt decided that, again, he was a business reporter at heart, and he wanted to have he wanted to start his own business publication, and that was originally called the Gulf Coast Business Review. And Matt's idea, and this takes me to Xavier's question, which is why we choose what we write and how we cover things. His idea then was to have a business publication that writes about businesses for business owners, business leaders, government officials, people who kind of intersect with business. And that's the idea that we still try and keep today. It's just in a different format. We're trying to be a lot more digital than print. But going back to that first start of the paper, the idea was always find these stories that maybe some other people aren't writing, these interesting, quirky, unique, different businesses, and write about their strategies, write about what they learned from. I think for me personally as a reporter, I love getting those stories. What did you learn from this mistake or this challenge, or how did you overcome that, so that other people can be, I say it all the time to the reporters, we want to inspire and inform our readers. So I think those stories are what we try and do. As far as answer the specific question of sort of how we get that out there and how we cover, it's changed a lot. I mean, Summer talked about it a little bit. There's this pressure to always be first. I think that was always there, but that's certainly heightened. I always say to the reporters, I'd rather be second and right than first and wrong, and I think that should hold true. Digital has been a really big thing for us. I think during COVID, not because of COVID, but we kind of recognized our readership skews a little bit older in our demographic, business owners, so 50 and up is kind of more of our demographic. And we know they're not going to be looking at print forever. We know they're going to get their news on this. So we've geared a lot of our news coverage and our thoughts are all toward breaking news, more news, get it digital, get it out faster, still with the idea of how these stories matter to our readers. And I think the last one was, how has the media changed for the good? I don't know. I hate to be so cynical. I'm just, thinking about that. I'm not sure there's been a lot of great changes. I think it's a challenging industry to be in. And I think we just keep trying to do the best we can in terms of being honest and building relationships with our readers. I know Summer mentioned that. I think that's something that's super important to us is, we want to hear from you. What stories should we be writing about? What are we not covering? I think that's it. Thank you.
All righty, Mitch. Yep. Or Dennis, I'm sorry.
Hey everybody, my name is Dennis Mitch Maley. I am the editor and featured Sunday columnist for the Bradenton Times, where I've been since 2009. I'm here a little bit longer than Mark. I just celebrated my 22nd anniversary on the Sun Coast. The Bradenton Times is a unique publication because it's completely independently owned. So Joe McClash, who was a county commissioner for 22 years, founded the paper in 2009 because he felt as a public official that there was too much special interest influence that clouded the coverage of the issues that he was working on at the county. And he would see things happen, and then he'd see them report it, and then he would talk to a reporter about it, usually at the Bradenton Herald, and he would hear about the pressure they would often be under to sort of either shade a story or not report something or leave parts out because it created complicated relationships with some of the biggest ad accounts. And that's always been a problem with media. And, you know, you really have a society almost has a choice between private media or state media, and they're both rife with problems. Obviously, state media never challenges the state. Private media is often under pressure not to challenge the industries and special interests. In our county right now, we're undergoing some major transformations that every single resident should be extremely concerned about. And I would describe that as a combination of what we call in the social sciences or political science, elite capture and special interest capture or corporate capture. And what that is an event in which a very few wealthy people are able to influence local politics to such an incredibly drastic degree that the power they have over the elected officials then allows them to reshape the institutions themselves and the workers and the bureaucrats beneath them so that these large organs of democracy can now be used completely to serve that special interest, almost always at the expense of the community at large. So right now you have a situation where they're talking about consolidating the 3 island cities over a political grudge, to be frank. We've gone and gutted our wetland protection policies, which everybody in Florida, usually even with a remedial understanding of our ecostructure, knows how incredibly important our wetlands are. And the problems we've had with algal blooms and everything from red tide to the blue-green algae mats, I'll remind everyone, those problems came to be under existing policies where we had the 50-foot wetland protections when it was adjacent to waterways. So there's a very strong scientific argument that we don't have strong enough protections. Now, we're probably never going to get more, but the idea that we're going to roll them back and just get rid of them and say whatever the state says is the maximum, it's absolutely absurd. The vast majority of the community didn't want it and spoke up against it, and it passed anyway. So we're in this situation right now where there's almost no longer an opportunity to affect change through appealing to local governments. But the good news is that we're seeing such a dramatic turnaround in terms of people's attention. And it's always been, anybody, and Mark and Summer and I have known each other for years, and we've been on panels like this. I've never not said this once. Local news is by far the most important you could possibly consume, and local politics is by far the most important that you could possibly participate in. Because everything that really touches your life, I know that we could get all, passionate and riled up about Washington and, they get all the sexy news coverage splashed all over the place. But the reality is what you see when you look out your window, the schools that your kids are educated in, the traffic and the infrastructure, all the things that really do impact day to day, they're decided right here locally. And the good news is, unlike Washington, you do have the opportunity to be heard by these people. You can get up and give public comment. You can get meetings with them to discuss things, and you can vote them out. The problem that we've been, in my opinion, and again, I'm an opinion columnist, so that's a little bit different. My job, I'm an editor, so I have the responsibility as a manager. In fact, one of my investigative reporters, Don Kitterman, is here today. And in that relationship, then I'm working as a straight news guy. So when I'm working as a line editor or working to shape a story, then it's about news. My column is about informing the public opinion through my experience analyzing public policy. So I am supposed to tell you what I think, and that's very different. Now, I will say that one thing that's shifted in the news landscape that I don't think is as I don't think it's necessarily a good thing, is that opinion news has become about 80% of what people consume. And that wasn't the case in the past. Opinion news is really supposed to just give you an analysis to help you if you read the story and it's a lot and you're saying, boy, that sounds really messed up, and what does this part mean? My job is to sort of explain it, and then to talk about potential solutions, why they may, good sides, bad sides, why they may or may not happen, the politics involved in terms of why they may or may not happen. So the things go together, but it really should be about the opposite. You should be consuming about 80% hard news and about 20% opinion news. But we're living in an ecosphere where a person can literally spend 24 hours a day, if they could stay awake, consuming media and never once have a single one of their beliefs challenged. They can shield themselves from anybody who thinks differently. And the problem with that is that it not only makes you think that you're definitely right with whatever your internal biases are, it also makes you think that almost everybody else feels the same way. And then it leads to this hyper-partisan nature of our culture that we're, I believe, completely gridlocked by politically now, where we'll buy into this idea that it's just those people over there. And if we could just get rid of them, everything will be fine. When the reality is, now more than ever, we need people to come together and focus on the things they have in common and they collectively want for the community, and not other people because of some ideological difference. The reality is, when people ask me about my ideology, they'll say, hey, you criticize Republicans more. Well, I live in Florida and Manatee County. There's not much of a chance to criticize Democrats, let's be honest. Seriously, that's what we live under, right? So if I'm analyzing, critiquing government, that's who I'm dealing with. But when people ask me what my ideology is, I'll say pragmatism. Because the reality is, I think ideology is poison. I think when we identify ourselves by some checklist of what we believe on certain things, to the point where now, different than my entire life, you have people driving around with trucks and cars that do nothing but advertise who I am based on my ideology. And there is nothing more toxic for a democratic government in which we are all living under the rules that they create. Whether or not we voted for them, whether or not they're our party, we're subject to them. There's nothing more poisonous, in my opinion, than ideology and that means. And what you're seeing now is demonstrative of that, because locally, that one party that controls everything is eating its own tail. Because as soon as somebody speaks up and says, yeah, but I don't agree with this, then they're othered. Well, you're not really in our party. You don't really share our ideology. And that's the real problem with it. In my opinion, until we can get past that, none of these things with media or anything will not only be fixed, but we are set up with technology that is exploiting those human nature instincts to be tribal and fight each other. And I'm going to leave you just with one quote, which I think really sums it up. And it was Edward O. Wilson, who was a scientist who pioneered the field of sociobiology. He died in 1921. The real problem right now is we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So people are harvesting everything you click on, everything you read, everything that makes you emotionally respond, and then they're directing stuff to make you angry and excited and agitated about it, so that you'll continue to fight amongst each other and never look up to see whose boot is actually on your neck. Thank you.
Thank you all. All righty, before we get to the audience questions, I have one more question from Xtavio. And that is, for all of you, do you all think true journalism is still respected? If yes, explain. If no, why?
I think there's definitely a decline in people's perception of the media, the respect for the media. And I credit that to the fact that there are so many options now for people to hear and listen to. When I started out so many years ago, so many decades ago, it was in the times of 3 stations. And so you looked to journalists to actually have all of their facts right. But I will say this, sometimes even I get conflicted, because sometimes I say, well, what we're getting in journalism, small j, what we expected, because some people who come from some minority communities, Black communities as an example, Hispanic communities, they might say, the media has always been biased in terms of how they report on people, particularly people. So I can see that. That's part of why I do what I do in terms of empowering voices, to show the other side of who people really are. So I do think that there's a decline in the trust and the respect, and I think some of that is planned, because the more you can put stuff out there, let's just say on social media, my colleague talked about 80% of what we read now is actually opinion, but it's opinion either cloaked in actuality, or it is the acceptance of opinion as actuality. So I just think that there's so many competing perspectives, but it's not just the perspectives, it's just how we consume these days. It's a different day, it's a different time.
Ready?
Can you say the question again?
Certainly. After I find it here real quick.
It's how, if we're respected and explain.
Do you think that do you think true journalism is still respected?
Yes, sort of. I think it is. I think it's, Mitch talked about like the bias is in the readers too. Like we get, hey, that was a great story, and it was a great story because it promotes their business. So is that a great story? I'm not sure. I think to answer the question, is media respected? I think in many ways we've done it to ourselves. And not the four of us up here, I think that we're really good at local news in our own different ways that we do it. I think the national media have kind of done it to ourselves in terms of, we've all seen those, there's a plane crash and how do you feel, right? Like you see that and you hear that and you're like, well, do I really want to be involved in the media? And I think, I'll sort of talk bad about a competitor. They're not in the room, but our biggest competitor in Tampa is a weekly business publication, and they often will put exclusive on things that we get the same things. And I've had conversations with their editor about that, and he's like, well, we just want people to think that they're getting it first from us. And I said, well, I know, but that's not true. And, we're supposed to be true. And then, but to answer the point about the respect in the media, a few weeks ago, I was telling an attorney friend about this, not because I wanted to sue them, but I was just mentioning it, that this publication does that. And he said, well, I always assumed that when something has exclusive on it, it means that entity or person or company paid for it. And I'm wondering, do other people think that? And again, that's bad for our industry because, as we all know up here, nobody pays us for our journalism, right? That's not a thing. There are publications that do that. That's not any of us. And so how many others think that? And that affects our reputation.
Summer?
So my answer to this would be, I think people have lost respect. And I think what Dennis hit on, if you're one side, you pull one side or the other politically, I've noticed that too with the national media. And I always say, I'm so thankful for what I do because I may have thought I was something but politically, but by my job, I've been able to meet all candidates and both sides, and I hear both sides of the story. And personally, I feel like that's made me understand the community and world a little bit better. But while I answer it that way, day to day, I do not feel disrespected. Every single person I interview is always kind to me, polite, no matter the topic. So again, building those relationships, I guess, and covering the local news. Even if I don't agree with someone or the story, I never feel disrespected. So I think we live and work in a great community where we rise above that.
I'll kind of answer this in two ways. One, I always turn the microscope back on the audience, because I will tell you that when people say, why don't you write more of this and why do you write so much of this? For the vast majority of news outlets, it's just a reflection of what people read. And we're all old enough that we went through the transition from all print media to print digital to almost all digital. And with digital came a level of analytics that we never had access to before. So we would only have really, when it was a newspaper, you had the letters that you got in, you had comments from people, and you just kind of had to guess which the biggest stories were, right? But then all of a sudden we had analytics, And the whole entire industry became shocked because it was very different than what we thought. And we saw that, oh my, that's why you see stuff like the Dirty Dining. Dirty Dining gets so many more clicks than an investigative news report. And Dirty Dining costs almost nothing. It's just a report, right? And you're turning it around in an hour and you get 10 times the click as something I put an investigative journalist on for 2 weeks, and I might not even get any content out of it. So when we made the shift from news really being a business, even when it was a division of large corporations, it wasn't expected to make money. And then all of a sudden, during the cable era, a lot of conglomerates came in and bought family-owned newspapers and television stations and said, hey, you need to make a buck at the end of the day. And people started to realize if you tell people what they want to hear and confirm their biases, you'll make more money because they'll watch. So now you have a bifurcated news system where if you go to Newsmax and Fox, you're going to get this spin. You go to CNN or MSNBC, you're going to get this spin. And nobody is going to give you any spin within it that challenges institutions of power or the status quo, because those large corporations are supported by the most wealthy institutions in the country, the most wealthy individuals in the country, and those people are doing very, very well under a status quo they'd like to maintain. So you're never going to have the status quo challenge. It's just going to be this guy, that side or this side, who's wrong. Maybe they're both working 90% for the same group of people, and they're just manipulating our emotions over other stuff that they generally don't even care about. Most of these people that speak so passionately about these cultural issues, they go in the back room and do a deal for, a defense contractor. None of that stuff has any problem with them working together. But all of a sudden, a real problem needs to get solved that will challenge the status quo. And then it's, well, I won't work with a Democrat. Well, I won't work with a Republican. So that sort of story isn't told enough in that large sphere, and that you'll only get really from independent media. And the last thing I'll say is that the thing that journalists have to be more aware of in that dynamic is something that we call audience capture, which means there's an incentive. You don't even have to be ideological, but there's an incentive to say I know what mouse sounds I can make to make people clap on that side of the room or this side of the room. So if you hired me to be, a only conservative or an only liberal, I'd know how to do it. I'd know exactly how to rile up either side and get them all thinking that, the other side's the end of the apocalypse. But the truth has to be, rather than trying to seek that sort of self-validation, it has to always be about seeking the actual truth. And that's probably the one thing that we've gotten away with, but I would say that's just as much as the audience's fault as it is the journalists, because again, if you're just clicking on that thing that makes you feel like, hey, that thing that I suspected is true, and then you're rejecting anything that challenges your status quo, you're not going to get anywhere. So we all have to be willing to talk to people on the other side, willing to engage, not just with bullet points and you're this and name calling, but an actual conversation about end results. And then what you always find is about 80% of the time, most Americans agree. And with everything going on in the world right now, I promise you, if we don't get to a point where we can have conversations across the aisle, neither side is going to save us from the other. What's going to happen is we're going to tear each other down from within.
Thank you all.
I think just so good journalism. What we do, I would encourage everybody to read the Bradenton Times. We come out 3 days a week, and we get a lot of, hey, that's a liberal, even though our publisher's a 22-year Republican office holder. We get a lot of, hey, that's the other side or whatever from people that don't want to have that thoughts challenge. But what we never get, ever, is somebody saying this is exactly what was wrong. They just get there's a bias, not here's what would be different. So the solution to that is to keep giving people good journalism that is fact-based and does not have an agenda. And over time, and we're seeing that in our publication more this year than ever before, over time, people will seek you out and find you and realize, okay, I can go there, and they're going to be chock full of documents, and they're going to have receipts for everything they report on. And it's pretty hard to put an ideological label on it if you're showing pictures of the text messages, documents from the government officials, and you're backing up all your work. So good journalism would be my answer.
I'm going to speak to what you said earlier, which is what I would call civic engagement. I think to hold people who we are reporting on, to hold them accountable is the beginning of it. We have to be more civically engaged. When you're civically engaged, when you're talking to your elected officials, when you're talking to your neighbors even, that gives them the understanding that you're paying attention, which makes it easier for us to report on what things are being paid attention to. And talk to folks, talk to us as journalists, but talk to the people who we are reporting on. If the people we're reporting on take the position that, hey, I got this covered, nobody's listening to the media anyway, it just feeds the beast.
Anyone else?
I would just agree with everything that Mitch said before, and just to add to that, it's externally, it's what you all are doing. Mitch and I were at a Manatee Leadership Day. It was Media Day, I think, and we talked about the same question came up, and it's sort of what the audience wants, right? You get what you want, and one of us had asked, who here pays for streaming entertainment? Everybody raises their hand, right? Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney, all that stuff. Who here paid? And they all said in the audience, we want more local news. We want the less polarization that you're talking about. And then there was about 50 people in the room who said, who pays for digital news, a monthly digital news? Not a single hand went up. So, and these are Manatee County leaders, and I think that's pretty, I mean, you guys are all like civic engaged. I wonder how many people here pay for digital news monthly. See, there's engaged people here. So, but I think that's the answer's part on the audience as well, because, to a certain extent, we are providing what people want, people ask for.
I'd say make yourselves available. Hold our county and city leaders accountable instead of no comment. We should be asking everyone, if you're representing a certain area, you need to be speaking up when asked the hard questions. We elect local and county officials, or excuse me, city and county officials, so we want to hear from them on issues. And again, I agree with what everyone else said. You want to make sure we're being truthful. If you do have a question about something and don't, instead of just attacking, say why this wasn't truthful and I have this, because a paper will run a follow-up, a redaction, or, we will too if something's wrong. We'll make it right. Instead of attacking, let's provide information so we can get the correct information out there.
Wonderful. Thank you.
One of the big things that I've noticed is that I grew up going to City Hall with my parents and with my great-grandparents. They were really engaged. I say City Hall, but when I say City Hall, I really mean county commission, school boards, local government. I used to take my homework to City Hall, take my homework to the school board meetings, because my parents, my great-grandparents, the family, the community was engaged. And even though at that point in time when I was growing up, I went to kindergarten. I lived here pretty much all my life. Went to kindergarten in Sarasota County, graduated from Riverview High School in 1976. So I have seen a whole lot of change. When I started out at Riverview High School, this was still a city where when I would get off the bus coming out of Newtown, there were liable to be students at the bus stop waiting when we got to Riverview saying, go back where you came from. So I've seen a lot. And through all of that, we still kept going to City Hall to talk to the county commission, to talk to the city commissioners about change that impacted this community. So people were really engaged. Today, I think we are so removed from our elected officials, and those are the people who really can make a difference. Those are the ones who, down to when is your garbage going to be collected, happens. And so to step back and say, I'm just reading about it, but I'm not engaged with them, even if they're not listening, still sit down in front of them. Demand that you have an audience. It might take a month to see somebody, but it was a city where people talked to each other, even if we didn't have the same perspectives. There were a whole lot of people who would have loved to have maintained the status quo. But you have to keep pushing and sitting in front of those elected officials, the administrators say, we are paying attention, we're sick and tired, and we're not taking it anymore. So don't give up.
Well, I think sort of a two-pronged answer. One, I work primarily with the Business Observer, but I think you're asking more on the community newspapers, and I've certainly been there for almost 20 years, so I can answer that. But the first part of the answer is we're hyper-local, and that's what motivates people, I think, to read our publication. You know, I've heard our publisher, I mentioned Matt before, Matt's daughter, Emily Walsh, is our publisher now, and Emily's often spoke at podiums like this and said her best compliments are when she hears from people who say, you know, we clipped that article and we put it on the refrigerator. It's our son, it's our nephew, it's our, you know, it's our daughter at a, you know, Lakewood Ranch High School marching band competition. You know, all these things. People want to engage. They want to see their families and friends and see things going on in the community. So I think that's what does really well. And I think there's always going to be a place, I hope, for that print product. That's specifically on the Observer side. And I think on the Business Observer, which I primarily work for, we found in the past 2 or 3 years, news stories. People want to know what CEO left, what CEO is coming. They want to know, and I know that some of you probably would get this as well. I'm sure some are on her metrics. What new flights are coming into Sarasota? People want to know about new restaurants. You put Publix in a headline, it does great. People want to know about what's going on with their Publix. You know, everybody has their own Publix. So, roundabouts, yes. Roundabouts, big, yes. So I think those are the things that, but to answer your primary question, it's those community news, those, hey, I saw you in the paper, those do really well for us.
Well, thank you all so much for your time today. I think this is a really interesting and productive meeting, so thank you. Alrighty, and I just have a few announcements. Thank you all to everybody that attended today. We really appreciate it. And thank you again to our panel. Thank you to our board of directors and our program committee. And we also want to thank Basil's who provided us our lunch today. So it's always nice to switch things up from salad, right? We'd like to thank the following news media for coverage of this luncheon, and that's going to be Charles Clapsaddle, station manager, and the METV crew here in the back for taping and broadcasting our luncheon. Thank you. And then we also would like to thank the ABC7 WWSB news team for attending and covering today's meeting, the Bradenton Herald, and then the Sarasota Herald Tribune. So thank you all. You guys have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you. Oh, and just a reminder, this is our last meeting until February, where we have our Pat Glass luncheon. So you guys enjoy your holidays. We'll see you guys after the new year.